Welcome to Love Your Job, Love Your Life podcast. This is episode 11, and I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Cowie today. Mark is an experienced chief people officer and has worked with many boards. He's got we've had a number of conversations over the last couple of months and some interesting conversations about the role of a CPO and actually what is the real role of the CPO. So we're going to be talking about that today. Before we get into that, though, welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thank you, James. It's great to be here. Very honored to be asked to join you.
No problem. Look, let's get straight into it. So we talked about the role of a CPO. Why is the, let's call it, real role of the CPO so important in today's world?
Well, we've had a few conversations about this. The role of the CPO has certainly become a lot more prominent over the last few years. And I think that's a good thing. It shows that businesses are finally recognizing just how important people are to their success. But when I think about what makes a real CPO, I would say the first thing is that they need to be on the board or the exec committee. If you're a CPO, it's not just about managing HR. You're sitting alongside the CEO and other leaders, shaping the strategy, influencing decisions, and helping drive the business forward through its people. So if you're not part of the exec committee or the board, then I would say that you're probably closer to a head of HR role. Now, don't get me wrong, both roles are important, but they're very different, and I think that distinction matters. So you asked, what does a CPO actually do and why is it important right now? Well, I would say that a real CPO isn't just looking after HR processes. They're a strategic partner who understands the business inside and out, everything from the strategy and finances to sales and marketing to technology and the business risk. I think the best CPOs are also confident enough to challenge leadership when it's needed, acting as the voice of the company's culture and making sure people aren't an afterthought, but a priority in every big decision. Yeah. And they're the ones who help the CEO understand how decisions will affect employees and guide them towards making the choices that are in the best interests of the workforce and ultimately the business itself. And I think, the role has never been more important than it is today. The business world is changing. AI is reshaping industries. Attitudes around diversity and inclusion are evolving. And employees are looking for more meaningful engagement at work. I sometimes think of myself as Jiminy Cricket for the leadership team. That little voice of reason and conscience that reminds them to do what's right, even when it's not the easiest path. Yeah. And we've seen plenty of examples of this recently in businesses where they haven't got the balance right. If you take diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's one of those areas where companies can really lead with purpose. But in some places, especially the US at the moment, we're seeing CEOs bending to political pressures instead of standing up for what's right for their people. A good CPO ensures that DEI isn't seen as some political agenda, but as a fundamental business priority. It drives innovation, attracts talent, and it reflects the values of the workforce and the customers they serve.
Yeah.
And it's about holding the line and reminding leaders things like integrity and courage matter just as much as the bottom line.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right around kind of this changing landscape. I hear it all the time, Mark, where there's where I'm talking to organizations, even and I don't like the C word of COVID, but if we think back to pre-2020, and we think about the environment pre-2020, and now we've fast forward the clock 5 years. I can't believe it's 5 years, but 5 years, the change in landscape in that 5-year period is huge. Yeah. Not only is the changing landscape huge, also the generation, we're starting to see the next generation of people come through as well. And therefore, for me, the CPO role becomes so important, because that is, as you say, it's the voice of the people.
Yeah.
Is needed, because if you don't get that people strategy right, you don't get the output of the business performance right, because it's the people that often drive the business, right?
Yeah.
So it's really, all the things you're talking about are so important. Often a challenge though, right? Because you've talked about 5 or 6 different things that suddenly you need a strategy for and an agenda for, and it's about how do you get that right. But I definitely see that the dynamics of the board, as you say, are changing, right?
Yeah.
So it's less about probably it was always the right-hand person to the CEO was what the CFO. Actually, a real true board, there is no right-hand person, because everyone should be equal.
Yeah.
There's a conversation for another day, maybe, Mark.
Well, I think CPOs are becoming the new CFO in that regard, that they are becoming the right-hand person to the CEO and advising them how to make the organization more effective through its people. Because at the end of the day, that's what drives the organization is people. And that's one thing you need to get right. And some CEOs are recognizing that.
Yeah. And look, I talk about it all the time with the Engage to Succeed business.
Yeah.
Now, if you engage your people correctly and in the right way, and you understand them, then you get the best out of them. And the more you get out of them, less attrition you get, or the more output you get, the more discretionary effort. Don't like those words, but the more discretionary effort you get, that drives productivity. Productivity drives revenue. Revenue drives growth. Growth drives profit, etc., etc., etc. So it's a really interesting concept, Mark. So you touched a little bit on this, but when we think about that CPO role, as you've talked about, and it being part of that executive team, it can be quite a difficult team sometimes. Sometimes for some organizations, it can be quite a difficult team to infiltrate as a CPO, especially if the business is going through growth and you get invited onto the board if you weren't on the board.
Yeah.
But how do CPOs, or how do you, as somebody that's been there and done this, stand out as part of that executive team?
Yeah. I think for a CPO to stand out, it's because they're not just the people expert in the room. They are a business leader who understands how every function of the organization connects back to its most important asset, and that's its people, as we said. So while the CFO might focus on numbers and the CTO on technology, the CPO is the one who makes sure that people remain at the center of every decision in the business. And to do that, the CPO needs to be fully embedded in the business. You can't just know HR. You have to understand finance, sales and marketing, operations, technology. It's about being able to sit at the table and bring a holistic view to the conversation, helping the exec team see how every decision, whether it's launching a new product, investing in technology, or even cutting costs, how this will ripple through the organization and impact its people. That's how you move beyond being just HR and you become indispensable to the leadership team. I think another way to stand out is by being the voice of balance in the room. Other leaders might be laser focused on short-term wins, but it's the CPO who reminds everyone to think about the long-term health of the organization, whether that be its culture, its workforce, or its reputation. And sometimes that means being the person who challenges decisions, not in a combative way, but by asking the right questions. How will this affect employee trust? What does this mean for attracting and keeping great talent? And these aren't easy conversations to have, but they're the ones that will ensure that the CPO will be seen as a strategic partner.
Yeah. And especially important, that commercial piece.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and again, this is something that I've seen in organizations that I've worked in, Mark, before setting up Engage to Succeed. Unfortunately, the people function is always seen as a and I'm going to say a cost function.
Yeah.
Because you don't necessarily have something you can sell and bring revenue back in. So therefore, actually, as it's a cost and it's a central cost, it often is the function where it gets cut as well. And then you take it back and you get leaner and leaner and leaner and leaner. But where I've worked for really great CPOs in the past is where they've said, look, if we do this, the impact is exactly what you've been talking about. If we do this today, the impact is tomorrow, it's going to be like this.
Yeah.
And then the day after is going to be like this.
Yeah.
And it's not tomorrow, the day after, it's 6 months, it's a year, it's 2 years. And it's that impact, long-term impact that says, actually, what's the cost of, rather than what's the cost of reduction, what's the cost of not doing something?
Yeah.
And, this is something that I'm really passionate about when I talk about engagement. What's the cost of not doing engagement? The cost of not doing engagement is a loss of productivity.
Yeah.
And it's that the commercial, as you talk about it, the commercial CPOs out there are the ones that can actually justify what they're doing and show the business the impact that may have.
Yeah.
But it's having that finance hat on from a budget perspective. It's having that, sales and marketing hat on as well around what are we portraying to the external markets, all those other factors that really come into play.
Yeah.
That make a difference, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, brilliant. And look, when you think about, we talk very much around kind of what is the role and how do people stand out, but this can often be a challenge for CPOs, Mark, in, as I said, infiltrating that board. So what does CPOs need to do more of? And you've touched on some of it probably, but what do they need to do more of which can add real value to the board where it makes them stand out?
Well, I think if CPOs really want to add value at the board level, we have to move beyond traditional HR responsibilities and establish ourselves as true strategic leaders. It's not just about managing people processes.
Yeah.
It's about, as you said, it's about showing how those processes directly contribute to the business outcomes to make the organization more resilient and competitive. First and foremost, I think we have to lead with data. Metrics like retention rates, engagement scores, or workforce productivity, they're important, but they only matter if we can connect them to financial and operational results. For example, instead of saying engagement is up, a CPO should say engagement is up, and here's how it's driving a 10% improvement in customer service. It's about connecting the dots in a way that resonates with the board and reinforces how people drive the business success. I think we also need to be proactive, and that means anticipating challenges. Whether it's workforce planning to prepare for automation, or navigating cultural shifts during a merger, or tackling employee burnout. It's about bringing these conversations to the board before they turn into problems. If you're consistently helping the board see around corners, you'll become an invaluable strategic partner. And another key area is making sure that, people are at the center of business strategy. We all hear the phrase, our people are our greatest asset. But all too often, that's where the conversation stops. A great CPO ensures that those words translate into action by fostering a culture where employees feel valued, empowered, motivated. It means advocating for things like employee development, well-being, DEI initiatives, not as nice to haves, but as critical drivers of innovation, retention, and growth. And I think that the kind of last point I would make is, don't forget storytelling. Data is important, but it's the story behind the numbers that really bring them to life. And I think telling the board how a leadership program transformed someone's career, or how a team delivered exceptional results under tough circumstances, makes those conversations more meaningful and impactful as well.
Yeah. It's very, very true. And again, I've seen it time and time again. People present numbers, but they miss the so what that sits behind the number.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that really is the most powerful thing. and lots of organizations I talk to now, we talk about an engagement score, and my first reaction to an engagement score is, so what? What does that tell you?
Yeah.
And they go, well, it's gone up by 2 points. That's what it tells us. Yeah, but what does that actually tell you? 2 points is great. Well done.
Yeah.
But
we're in the business, is it making an impact?
Where in the business? Where is it not doing so well? What do we need to do differently, etc.? So there are so many questions. And this is becoming, for me, actually, one of the, when I was in my last role, we often used to talk about meaningful data.
Yeah.
Because there is so much data out there nowadays, and the world almost is so supportive of data, but there's so much data out there that you've got to be very careful. And if you're really clever, you can manipulate the data to tell somebody what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And often that is
what
what
happens. I haven't done that.
No, I would never do that, clearly, unless I wanted to show how great recruitment were. But but people do, and often actually it's not what people want to hear.
Yeah,
it's the reverse of that people want to hear. It's like, what's the negative connotations of this, and how are we going to improve it? Because that improves the overall, right?
Yeah.
So really insightful, and I was always a big data person when I was in the corporate world, and I used to love it. And you get loads of it in talent acquisition and recruitment, as you know. So I was a proper data nerd. But there we go. That's
data is good. I think the last point I would make on CPOs is that they need to be involved fully in discussions about other parts of the business. If you're sitting on the board, you can add to the discussion on things like finance, technology, and operations, and not from just being not from a people perspective, but really as business leaders. And that really sets you up in adding value to board conversations. So I encourage HR leaders to cross the boundaries a little bit and get involved in other conversations.
I remember one of my jobs that I had, we always used to, I don't know whether you've heard it or not, but we also always used to have a day of walking in another person's shoes. But that was exactly the reason for doing it. So it was when I was at the airport. So I was recruiting people, baggage handlers, check-in staff, whatever it was. And they used to encourage us to go and work and do that job for a few days.
Yeah.
So when you were talking to candidates about it, you understood it a lot better, and you could have input into how to improve it, which is kind of, now I'm not saying a CPO should go and do every role in an organization, because they'd never have time for their CPO role. But
some of them do.
Some of them do. But yeah, you're right. Some people I know, they've been on sales meetings as an example, and it's a great way to go and understand kind of the client, the process, and all that stuff. So great piece of advice. We've talked very much around kind of the good and what people should be doing more of to get there. With your experience, where do you see the biggest pitfalls, traps that CPOs fall into, though? Because everybody does, irrelevant at level. You fall into that trap of doing your job, and then all of a sudden you become stagnated, or you're on a roller coaster ride, as they say. So what are the main pitfalls and traps that CPOs fall into? Because there'll be people watching this wanting to make that step. And if you can help with, don't fall into this trap, it would be great.
Well, I think that's a great question. And, let's be honest, being a CPO isn't always straightforward. While the role's absolutely critical, it does come with its fair share of traps. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself falling into quite a few. I think one of the biggest traps is focusing too much on HR processes without tying them closely enough back to business outcomes. So it's easy to get bogged down in policies and frameworks, or even the latest HR trends. But if you can't show how those initiatives directly impact results, whether that's revenue or customer satisfaction or innovation, you risk coming across as disconnected from what really matters to the business. Another trap is being reactive rather than proactive. For a long time, HR was seen as the department that swooped in to fix things after they went wrong. But to add real value as a CPO, you've got to anticipate challenges and address them before they escalate, whether that's forecasting recruitment needs during a market shift, or preparing for the cultural impact of a merger being ahead of the curve is what makes you a trusted partner at the leadership table. One of my biggest bugbears is the tendency to overcomplicate things. And most of the companies that I've worked for are guilty of that. In HR, we sometimes create processes or frameworks that are so complex, they end up frustrating the people they're supposed to help. Yeah. And as CPOs, it's our job to lead by example and champion simplicity. And that doesn't mean cost cutting or cutting corners. It means designing systems that are clear, easy to follow, and effective. And when you make simplicity your priority, it's amazing how much more effective your initiatives will be. I have a list, I've got quite a few here. I think a few more and then I'm done. I think one of the other major pitfalls is just not engaging with employees before rolling out new initiatives. Yeah. Too often decisions are made at the leadership level without input from the people who will actually be impacted by them. And taking the time to involve employees early on gives you valuable insights, helps you build buy-in, helps ensure the initiative is genuinely fit for purpose. And it's really important that employees feel that they've been listened to and that their opinion matters. And on a similar note, not communicating is another big trap. HR is guilty of assuming that people just know what's going on. And most of the time they don't. So if you think you've communicated enough, you probably need to do it 3 times more.
Yeah.
It might be repetitive, but that's how you ensure clarity and avoid the nobody told me about this biggest moments.
Yeah.
And I think
embedding principles takes time, right? And sometimes you have to tell people 3, 4, 5 times before it actually becomes natural and they take it in and they understand it and they process it. So it's really important.
Politician, that's what they do. They just repeat the same thing over and over again until it finally sticks. With communication, you have to think about the various different methods that you share a message, whether that's online, by email, by documents, by, monthly meetings. Over communicate is always my first port of call.
Yeah. Very good.
And I think finally, one of the biggest traps is really sticking to the status quo. It's easy to fall back on familiar practices and assume that they'll continue to work. But I think great CPOs know the importance of challenging the established ways of doing things. Sometimes it's rethinking about outdated policies or addressing cultural barriers or introducing fresh approaches that push the company forward. And that doesn't mean change for the sake of change. It's about having the courage to ask, is this really the best way to achieve what we need? Taking a step back and being willing to challenge the norm, I think, can cover lots of opportunities for innovation and growth that may otherwise be overlooked. And progress often comes from those bold, thoughtful decisions that goes beyond what feels comfortable. And if all that fails, use a sense of humor. That's generally helped me out on many of occasions.
Oh, that's a great final one, that one, Mark. Look, there's some really great advice in there, and it's kind of, I suppose, music to my ears as well, because I have a very similar viewpoint to you, which is simplify, don't overcomplicate, communicate and share. My favorite phrase and anyone that's ever worked for me probably is fed up with hearing it, but my favorite phrase is, if you've always done what you've always got, you'll always get what you've always got. Said that a few times in meetings, but it's so true. And actually, I think we naturally default to our comfort zone, which is what we've done in the past. Whereas actually sometimes the best things that I've done in my career have been when I've challenged something, we do something differently, especially when people say it's never going to work. And actually it does work, and the benefits of doing it are huge. So I love that one as well of step outside that comfort zone almost. But, if all else fails, smile and laugh. That's the best way forward.
It has worked for me for years.
Yeah, it's worked for me as well, Mark. So look, really interesting conversation. Time disappears when I do these podcasts because we get into this rhythm. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, Mark. And I love your thoughts and your thinking about this. There is a real need in so many businesses for that role of a CPO to become the right-hand person to the CEO.
Yeah.
Everywhere I look and everywhere I see, the people agenda is becoming so important. And there are so many points of discussion around it.
Yeah.
Whether it be strategy, whether it be DE&I, whether it be new generations coming through, OD, whatever it might be, there's always something going on.
Yeah, we could spend a whole day on this topic.
We could. And if you get into the flow of it, you suddenly go, oh yeah, there's another thought and there's another thought. So it's been a real pleasure. I hope that the people that have been listening to this have taken some nuggets away. The podcast is Love Your Job, Love Your Life. This one really for me is actually CPOs that are listening to this. How do you help your employees to love their job and love their life more every day? Because that's the trick. If you get this right, irrelevant of anything else, if you get this right, you are genuinely going to be helping your employees to love their job more. So Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on and sharing your thoughts. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Anyone that wants to get in contact with Mark, I'm going to make a huge assumption here, Mark, which you shouldn't always do, but I'm going to make a huge assumption. LinkedIn, professional network. If you want to pick up a conversation with Mark around this and maybe, pick his brains a little bit more, I'm sure. Are you willing if I share your details below?
Absolutely, that's fine.
Yeah. Connect in with Mark and have another conversation. But Mark, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Speak to you soon.
Bye now.
Thanks.